interwebs, welcome to Let's Fix Computers. I bought myself a TS100. So this is the quote-unquote mini soldering iron that everyone raves about on the internet. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I've had my eye on one of these for a while because my current soldering iron that I use as my daily is it's a WEP 862D 2-in-1 soldering and rework station. I've done a review on this before. I bought this a while back and it's done me proud. It's been all right, TM. The 907F, the WEP 907F soldering iron that it comes with has been okay, basically. And I say okay because it does its purpose. For just general use hobbyist soldering and a little bit of rework stuff, it's fine. It works. It does its job. However, my misgivings about this, having used it for about a year or two, is that the temperature on it is not particularly accurate. The main problem with it is that if I just remove the tip here, when I remove the tip, as you can see, there is the heating element there. Let me just fix the focus. And when I put the tip on, it's very sort of loose fit. And then this sort of just clamps down over top and you screw it on. And you have a very poor interface between the heating element and the actual tip. And this means that although the soldering iron will tell you it's at one temperature, what you're getting at the tip could be something completely different. And in addition to that, the recovery on it is poor. So you end up driving it at a much higher temperature than you theoretically should do. And that knackers your tips and all the rest of it. And for example, in order to do the really fine stuff, to do sort of very fine solder work, I bought some extra tips for this thing, just some cheap eBay tips. And where's my fine one? There it is over there. So this is the one it came with, and here is a super fine one that I bought. As you can see, really sharp point, so I can get onto the SMD stuff. However, this guy, I've completely wrecked it by having to run it at like 450, 480 degrees C, because that's how much temperature I had to put into it to get any kind of usable heat at that tiny little tip. And it just roasted the tips on this soldering iron. Still works, but it's only good for hobbyist stuff. So while I have no intention of actually retiring the WEP soldering iron because it's still good for hobby stuff and the access, the box for it and everything makes it really good for instant ready to go use. However, what I wanted was a different soldering iron which had better available tips for it. Now the big deal about, well, one of the great things about the TS100 is that not only is it very cheap, it's about £50 if you buy it from China, is that there's loads of different tips available for it. It's got really good support available for it. And these things are cheap as heck. The tips are like £6 each or something like that. And as a result of this, I've been able to buy it. I bought it with just a bog standard conical tip. These aren't particularly good, but for hobbyist stuff, whatever. However, I bought for it a slot tip, as it's sort of the chisel tip, and also a knife edge tip. So as you can see, I've got two extra tips that should be good for SMD work, and compared to the big clunker that is the WEP, these should be perfect for doing SMD work on laptops and that kind of thing, and also for soldering micro USB ports and stuff like that. So I have a dedicated soldering iron for doing the small stuff. And the other party trick of the TS100 is not only have you got these very easily interchangeable tips, is that the whole thing runs on 12 to 24 volts. And that means with the DC jack on the back, you can power this from basically anything you want. So that means that you can power it from battery as well. It does also have a micro USB connector for firmware updates and things like that, but you can power it from basically any DC source of 12 to 24 volts, and it'll do 17 to 65 watts. And depending on the amount of power you give it, depends on how much heat and how quickly it warms up. So let's give this thing a quick test drive. So firstly, I did some quick checking, and that jack on the back is a 2.5 outer diameter, 1.5 inner diameter jack. And that just so happens to be the same jack that a lot of Toshiba laptops and Asus laptops use. So if you bought yourself a Toshiba 19-volt laptop charger, a 65-watt laptop charger for a Toshiba laptop, you'll find it powers this thing perfectly. So that's a cheap and readily available charger that will quite happily power this thing. I've got this guy hooked up to my DC bench power supply, so let's plug it in and see what we get from it. And very inconveniently, this stupid cable is reverse polarity. Okay, now I'm back with the correct polarity. So I've got this thing set to run at 20 volts at the moment, so we're just sort of well within its operating voltage. We will test it on multiple different power levels so you can see how it behaves. So it starts up to here by default, so it's press A to start warming up, or if I press the B button, it will show me the current input. So we've got just shy of 20 volts there where we've got some cable losses, and the tip is currently at 22 degrees C. And if I keep pressing that button, we can step through the different modes. Factory reset, operating temp 360, so sleep temp 200, sleep time in 2 minutes, idle time, so switch off in 360 seconds, and then whatever this stuff is, off voltage, drop out at 10 volts, that kind of thing. Temp calibrate, hands, I can't remember what all that stuff is. There's an instruction manual, look it up, you get the idea. So let's wait for it to return to the idle point. There we go, and press A, and off it goes. That's heating up. And as you can see, we get real-time temperature on the side there, which is nice and handy, and it shows you that it's heating up. So that's going to go all the way up to 360, which is what I've set it to. And there we go. And it's at 360, and it's maintaining temperature. And if I hold down one of the buttons, we can now lower that, so we could drop that down to 300, and now it's going to drop to 300. So there we go, losing temperature, and now we're down to 300. And I think the maximum this thing will go up to, I think it goes up to 400. Let's see, other way. All the way with LBJ, 400 degrees. And that's really as high as you're ever going to need to go. And up it goes to 400 degrees. As you can see, it's stabilizing out. Donezo. Cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to lower that back down. I'm going to bring that down to 250. And I'm going to do some quick tests just to show you how it behaves with different power levels attached to it. So now what I'll do is, so that's settled down. I'm going to power that off again. And I'm going to drop my power supply down to 15 volts. All right, so now we're at 16 volts, and as you can see, we still have some heat in the tip. So let's get that warming back up again. And it warms up pretty quick. So how high can I go at 16 volts? Yeah, that still lets me go all the way up to 400, no worries. Will it reach that high? And for the record, it's pulling just shy of 2 amps at the moment, which is exactly what it says it does in the spec sheet. So yeah, 16 volts, still get a full 400 degrees, no worries, no problem at all. So I'm going to power that off, and I'm going to lower the voltage again. And we're going to go down to 12 volts. A hot 12 volts, so you know, generous. And now what we'll find is, nope, there we go, it's off. What are we set to at the moment? 360. Yeah, okay, that's all right. Seems to be okay at the moment. That's going up to 360. Okay. Now in my testing, so you'll notice it's much slower now. It is warming up, but it's taking longer. So because of that, it's because it's only drawing 1.4 amps instead. Now I did notice that if you have it on a mean 12 volts, it doesn't want to go. And I'm going to test that now and see if I can replicate that on camera. So I'm going to turn that off again. And you know what, just for argument's sake, I'm going to swap the tips out. Here's a really neat feature of this. Obviously, top end, that's hot at the moment, but here, it's warm, it's a little bit toasty, and if we get up to there, it starts getting that's a bit uncomfortable there. But there, I can actually remove that tip, and it's warm there. I can hold that tip by the end. So you can change the tips out on the fly on this thing. Very nice. So in the interest of testing, I'm just going to try starting that up from a cold tip, just to make sure that that still works, because I wasn't actually expecting it to work just then. So here's a cold tip. Oh yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, so before that actually gets going, I'm going to power that off again. And I'm going to bring that down to what will be... Okay, there we go. We're at 12.5 indicated on the power supply, and the iron is telling me it's getting a generous 12 there. So that's all right. That's not dipping below 12. Let's see if that will warm up for me. Oh, I've got to reset. I've got to wait for it to go back to the standby mode. There we go. Whatever. Now it's warming up. All right. Oh, there you go. There's your 12 volt range. So at this point, it's only 17 watts now, and as you can see, it's taking a while to warm up. And the amperage is spiking up to 1.7, which is over what it says in the spec. But as you can see, it is taking its time to warm up now. But that's still fine. You know, if you were using this thing mobile, that'd be absolutely okay. Now, one thing I did notice, which we'll see in later on in the video when I test this on battery power, is that seems to be a bit of a shaky, you know, if your battery is indicating 12 volts, you might not actually have 12 volts there. So take this with a pinch of salt. I wouldn't recommend running this thing at 12 volts, to be honest. Ideally, you need a 14 or up supply. Well, ideally 16 or up to get it into the 30 watt range. And I would recommend running this thing from a laptop charger that's dishing out 19 or 20 volts. And then you get the 40 watt and 65 watt range, which gives you drastically better performance. But if you're running this on a battery, I would recommend going with a 4 or 5 cell battery. Now, obviously, 300 is going to be too low to really work with here. However, at least it just proves that we can run it on a battery, which is the purpose. So, all right, there we go. Let's try again. It's still too low. Oh my god. Okay, let's just try 250. We can always build it back up again. I still don't know fully how to get around this menu. There we go. Okay. How's that? It's still not enough. See, this thing has a range of 12 volts, but 12 volts doesn't get you anything. It says it runs on 12 volts, but it really doesn't. I don't want a cal voltage. Okay, right, this is really dodgy. All these connections are precarious as heck. So let's see if this works. I've got two 11.1 volt LiPo batteries wired in series here, which is giving me about 25 volts because they're fully charged. So this setup is a little bit hot for a battery setup, but hopefully it won't mind. The input rating on this thing is 12 to 24, but you know, usually they've got a little bit of leeway and there's going to be some loss down the wire and stuff like that. It'll be all right. By the time we load them down, should be right. Anyway, as you can see, I've got a capacity controller here showing me the battery level of one of the batteries. So obviously this is only showing me one of the batteries. We got two in series. Here we go. Let's do the thing. So my connections are a bit loose here because I don't have very good connectors for this. These are just airsoft batteries. Go! Right, it's powered on. And yeah, that's saying a high 24 volts there. So we are running a little bit hot, but you know, it should be okay. See if that'll power up. Yep, it's warming up. And whoa, look at the battery level tanked for a moment and then it recovered again. All right, so let's up the temperature then. So let's go up, let's take it up to operating temperature. Let's take it up to 300. Well, let's go with LBJ 360. Go. Yeah, it's doing it. There we go. One battery powered soldering iron, powered from a couple of LiPos. So for a more sensible setup, what I should do is get a 14 volt, 14.7 or whatever the measurement is, volt battery, and run from that. And I'll show you the maximum temperatures that it can go to when I'm powering it from the bench power supply that I can vary a lot easier than this. However, for the time being, that's the proof of concept. As you can see, with a very simple setup of a couple of LiPo batteries, we now have a highly mobile soldering iron here. So obviously, I could carry, all I need to do is, I mean, this is just an old DC thing that I've robbed off of a plug pack it's actually from an old external hard drive that I've got wired in here. So all I need to do is buy a 14-volt battery, or a 15-volt-ish battery, put in an XT connector or whatever the correct one is, or even just, I've got Dean's connectors on these. You can use Dean's if you want, and just wire this directly onto a Dean's plug, and bam, I have an instant battery pack to power this from. And then I can put that in my toolkit, and if I'm out on the field and I've got a broken wire, if I've got a network cable that needs fixing up, I can whip out a TS100 soldering iron from a battery and just solder it in situ on the spot. And this thing heats up so fast that you'll be done in 5 minutes. So there it is. That's the TS100 running on a couple of LiPo batteries. Pretty cool. It's our old pal, the editor's voiceover, back again, because I realised at editing this point that everything I said was completely wrong. So anyway, I left this thing on for approximately an hour, and I came back periodically just to wake it up and warm it back up again. And as you can see, whenever it warms up, the battery level absolutely tanks. Then once it's up to temperature, it recovers again. So that kind of tallies for the amount of current that we're going to be drawing from it. So after about sort of an hour or so of just every now and then coming back and waking the soldering iron back up again, we used approximately 20% of the battery. Now we've got 1300 milliamp hours of capacity here because I've got two 1300 milliamp hour batteries, but because we're in series, we don't get the combined capacity, we get the combined voltage. So a 4 or 5 cell battery, so if you're shooting for, 15 or 20-ish volts, you're probably going to be buying that in approximately a 1500 milliamp hour capacity. So you're going to have more than what I've got here, which means over the course of the hour, you would have used, probably, no more than 20% of that. So we can see from this that running on battery and using it for, fairly heavy use, you can probably expect to get, 2 or 3 hours out of a battery, no problem at all. So really, it's pretty good going, and powering this thing from a LiPo battery, really straightforward to do and very feasible. You don't need an enormous brick or anything like that. Okay, so let's do some test soldering on this. So I've just grabbed an old graphics card here. I've got a blob of solder on a big ground plane here. So this is a heavy solder pad. This should be difficult to shift about, this big blob of solder. Let's see how it does. So I've bumped it up to 20 volts here, just to give it the beans. Theoretically, it should be able to do anything at the lower voltages. It just affects the warm-up and recovery time. So let's power this thing up. So with the beans on it, as you can see, the temperature is rocketing up pretty quickly there. That's all right. Up it goes, up it goes. And there's 360 degrees. Now, 360 is a little bit conservative. My wet soldering iron, I run at like 400 all the time because it seems to struggle lower than that. So let's see how this does. I've got the conical tip on it just to give something that's close to the wet. Let's see if it can burn through that. And whoa, it's struggling. So there's our base point. We can't quite get the whole lot of that to go molten. We're just drawing lines in it at the moment. So no problem. Let's bring that up to 380. So we'll give it another 20 degrees. Warming up. And there we go. That's 380. And now still struggling a bit. About 400. Right, here comes the chisel tip at 400 degrees. And whoom. There we go. Chisel tip, it's dragging a little bit, but as you can see though, because of the additional surface area, we're delivering colossal amount more heat to that. No problem whatsoever. And changing out the tips on this thing, super easy. It comes with a little Allen key for this. However, Allen keys are a pain in the backside. I found that a T6 screwdriver will fit that quite perfectly, so we can just undo that with a T6 screwdriver, loosen it off, and I can just pull that out. And I have found that tightening up the tip does make a difference. You do get much better power transmission there. And then we take our new tip, and as you can see, this is just a plug-in job. That slots in with a nice satisfying click, and we can just tighten that up again. And that's good to go. And there's my knife edge tip, all ready for use. So really neat design. There is a variation of this, I think the TS80 or something like that, that also runs on a USB-C connector. However, I opted for the TS100 because I wanted that nice DC jack, so I had a really nice broad range of input on the back. Because that's got just a simple barrel jack, I can just run this thing on any power source I've got lying around now. So I felt that this one would be more flexible. Apparently it's got a bit more grunt than the TS80 as well, but I don't think that's an issue, to be honest. If you need more grunt than what these things are giving you, then you're beyond electronics anyway. I keep putting fingerprints all over that screen. It's driving me up the wall. Cool, so much for that. So just for a fairness comparison, let's warm up my web soldering iron and see what that can do. So I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to set it to 360 degrees, same as what we had the TS100 on, and we'll see if that can also do this. So I'm going to give that a couple of moments to warm up. It warms up at about the same speed as the TS100. However, because the heating element is not in the tip, it's in the body, it's back here. Once it will warm up to 360 indicated, but then it needs like another 30 seconds or so to actually get the heat up to the end of the tip, I've found. So I'm just going to give that a moment longer. Okay, one polite waiting period later. So 360 indicated. Can we melt that solder blob? Can we ever? We can't even touch it. Look at that. I was a bit concerned that the TS100 wasn't tearing through that solder blob. I was like, I was hoping more than that. However, look at that. My wet soldering iron at 360 cannot touch that. And this is a big 2-in-1 solder rework station. It's not even trying. The small blob next to it, yeah, no worries there. That big ass blob though, literally it's just heat sinking all my power away. Fine, okay. Let's go up to 380 indicated. All right, 380. And I'm feeling a little bit of soft drag where you can feel that it's softening that solder, but it's just scratching it. Still nothing. All right. 400. 400, and I clean the tip as well. How about that? Oh, there we go. Oof, but I've got to lay it flat to get the actual heat delivery onto the board, and we're just struggling to draw a line in it. You can see where I'm just starting to draw lines in that solder, but it's still not properly melting it. Fine, 420. Blaze it. What about that? How high do we have to go? Now, of course, this is shortcomings of the wet soldering iron, rather than the TS100 being just that amazing. But it shows you the difference between a starter soldering iron and something that's actually good. You know, don't get me wrong. You know, the WEP 2-in-1 station has done me proud, but you can see where it has its limits. Oh, come on! Can we get heat into the board there? No, we can't. We still can't. 450. Oh, come on. Don't make me look like it. There we go. And at 450, we've managed to get it flowing. At 450, we're 50 degrees higher than the TS100 indicated. We've managed to start moving that solder about. There we go. That's nuts. So the TS100, after a very quick battle, easily takes the victory. No problems whatsoever. So yeah, so there it is. So as I say, I find that the control interface for this thing is finicky. You know, like the web control, it's got big clunking switches on the front. I go bang, bang, turn it on, set the temperature, start using it. You know, the controls for this are finicky. You've got to turn it on and then it always resets to 360 degrees. And, you know, sometimes you might want a bit more than that. And it's just sort of, it's a bit fiddly to use this weird on-screen control. Although, you know, being able to set the temperature in your hand as you go, that's kind of cool. I like that. But I don't know, just being limited to just these two push buttons is slightly annoying. And, you know, I mean, it's not difficult to power this thing. As I say, you can just plug in a Toshiba laptop charger and that's your power supply sorted. You don't need a bench power supply or batteries. You can run it on anything you want. So, you know, this isn't going to replace my wet soldering iron. However, for micro soldering, this will take the cake by far. If I'm working on something that is actually, you know, if I'm working on a big PCB like this, you know, I'm definitely going to pick up the TS100. And of course, this has the huge advantage of being able to be battery powered from just from a LiPo battery that you can carry in your pocket. And that's super cool. I like that. That means I can do repairs on my car. I can do repairs to cables out in the field. I can do loads of cool stuff with that. So yeah, on the whole, I think this is a really wicked bit of kit. And for 50 quid, it's a steal. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. The only disadvantage, apart from, you know, the slightly finicky interface, is that, as I say, it doesn't come with a power supply at £50. So, you know, if you buy a power supply for it for, you know, a tenner, you know, it's 60 quid. Then I wanted to buy a couple of different tips with it. So I spent like, I think I spent 5 or 6 quid on each of those. So, you know, maybe £70. Although, to be honest, I think I bought mine from banggood.com and I'm pretty certain that they allowed me to select out of a couple of different tips. So I think you were able to select either the chisel or the knife tip as one of them. I just wanted to get the conical tip just as an all-rounder, because these conical tips are, you know, they're good for doing wires and stuff like that. They're just not very good for surface mount work. But I wanted a selection, so I bought it with the conical and I bought these two tips separately. So by the time you've bought the soldering iron and accessories, you're probably going to spend closer to 60 or 70 quid. However, for a decent soldering iron, less than £100 is still a bargain. So on that front, I think it's highly recommended, and I'm really glad I bought this fella. I'm always a little bit wary about tools that people go mad about, but here I am. I'm now using wearer screwdrivers, and I've now got a TS100. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I'll see you all next time. Goodbye for now.